Hi, I'm Jess.
And I'm Matt.
And I can't believe you haven't seen The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Longest title so far of any movie we've done.
And pretty close in runtime, which, as you'll note from the DVD, was pretty important info to have right up front.
Very prominent on the menu.
First time I've ever seen a DVD menu that's like, here's the runtime you're in for, kids. Make sure you have popcorn, I guess.
Welcome back to I Can't Believe You Haven't Seen, with us doing episode 6. Back to a movie that I hadn't seen.
Wild to think this is episode 6.
I know. We've gotten a really great response to all of our episodes so far. We have a bunch of great friends that have tuned in, friends and family. There has been lots of new people that we don't know personally. So if you're listening at all, thank you. You guys are the best.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in and listening to us talk about movies.
Yeah.
And make terrible jokes.
Terrible jokes. Last time we made some terrible Italian accents. No accents this time around, really.
No,
except for a British accent or two, but...
Several British accents, but we probably will not imitate those. So, to get us started, as is tradition, because Matt hadn't seen this movie, I'll give a little bit of background and then I'll turn it over to you, and you can lead the conversation.
Sounds good.
Here we go. So, The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is a 2005 high fantasy film, directed by Andrew Adamson, who co-wrote the screenplay as well, with Anne Peacock and the writing team of Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely. As you likely know, it is based on the 1950 novel The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which was was the first published and second chronological novel in the children's book series by C.S. Lewis.
Yes.
And he's kind of a big deal, that C.S. Lewis.
I hear he's well regarded.
I think he's a big deal. I don't know.
Kind of a big deal.
Wait, is C.S. Lewis dead since we're just killing people all the time?
Okay, so I have been randomly either saying the wrong word or, in the case of Frank Oz of voiceover fame, accidentally thinking that I saw that he had passed away recently. We've edited that out of the Inside Out episode.
But
yes.
I never resist an opportunity to make fun. For the record, C.S. Lewis, as you might know, is long deceased. Passed away in 1963 at the age of 64. So, in any event, the film is the first installment of the Chronicle of Narnia film series. We won't be going too far into the fact that there are more movies. This really works well as a standalone as well. So
it does.
No need to go any further there. It's 2005, which is, again, wild to think about.
Yep.
It's the 20 years ago this time.
20 years ago.
It stars a variety of humans some that are very famous, and voices that are very famous, and then others that you never hear from again.
Yes, or barely hear from again.
So ones that you will be familiar with: Tilda Swinton, love Tilda Swinton, James McAvoy, Jim Broadbent, Liam Neeson. And as we discovered last night, and I thought was amazing, the voice of our good friend from previous episodes, Rupert Everett.
Yes. And also the other two that I recognized and thought I had the right person for, and the other one I recognized but didn't pick out at all, Ray Winstone as Mr. Beaver, or just Beaver. His wife refers to him as Beaver.
I think it might be his first name and his last name.
Mr.
He's
Beaver.
like Wilson from Home Improvement. Wilson.
And the other voice is Michael Madsen, who is the voice of the head of the Gestapo. I mean, the lead wolf. Freudian slip?
I think pretty apropos, as it were. Interestingly enough, as we discussed, there's also 4 actors that play the children and are arguably kind of a big deal in this movie.
Yep.
And none of them have gone on to do anything super notable that you'd go, oh, I know this face from there.
Yeah, which we actually looked up afterwards, because a lot of times when you have children actors in very prominent pieces of media like this, oftentimes you have 1 or 2 or maybe even all of them that go on to do more. Think of the Dawson's Creek cast from TV. Most of them went on to quite long, quite high profile careers. The 4 children in this one mostly did not. Some of them that almost immediately did nothing else.
Well, and then there is the one who decided to go on to political advocacy and advisory as a career.
Yeah, well, zigged when everybody else zagged, I guess.
I mean, do we know if they zagged? We don't really know what they did at all.
I mean, I did look up. It looks like there's lots of British TV. There's a few smaller movies. Nothing too notable.
Yeah, I mean, we could say the names, and I will, but William Moseley, Anna Popplewell, Skander Keynes.
Ooh, that's a tough one to say.
Yes, and I may have said his last name incorrectly, and then Georgie Henley. So, of those four, Skander's the one who's gone on to do political things, and otherwise nothing super notable, which I think is interesting. There's not necessarily a thread to pull out there, just interesting.
And interestingly enough, actually, in the same note, after we talked about that last night, I did look up Andrew Adamson, because I'm not super familiar with Andrew Adamson as a director, and turns out that he actually has directed some rather notable movies. The first Chronicles of Narnia, the second Chronicles of Narnia.
Whoa.
I bet you don't know where this is going.
I could guess, but you get the floor.
The third Chronicles of Narnia, and previous to that, Shrek and Shrek 2. Essentially, other than one movie called Mr. Pip, which I believe is based on the Charles Dickens Something Great Expectations related.
Would make sense. I don't know, to be fair.
Which has Hugh Laurie in it, and I was like, oh, okay. That's it. He has not directed another feature-length film since 2012.
Interesting.
He's mostly done producing credits for a lot of different kinds of movies. Actually, it's quite an extensive list. Lots of animated stuff for DreamWorks. Obviously, being involved with Shrek, it makes sense. So less of a known commodity of a director than we've mostly done, and even with some of the ones we've done before, someone like Herbert Ross wasn't super well known, but still did
other things.
Have a pretty decently sized career. So
interesting.
Yeah, a little interesting.
Turns out that that not doing super notable stuff was across the board for a lot of them.
Just happened.
But you know, not people like James McAvoy and Tilda Swinton.
No, definitely not. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to talk about certainly the actors, which I know they will come up. To sort of start with this, so I guess the introduction is of the story itself. Both you and I read this novel as kids.
Yes, many moons ago.
You for school, and I'm trying to think if I read it for school or if I just read it when I was younger because it was a well-known novel.
I mean, it's a big deal, really.
It is. It definitely is. Neither of us actually continued reading the book series, interestingly enough.
Correct. Also, neither one of us can't believe we haven't seen either of the other movies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now,
it makes sense given that we don't know those stories. And also, and we'll get into this a little bit later because I'll want to bring it up. Fantasy stories, neither one of our genres.
No, it tends not to be, so it's funny that this got picked for, like, that we chose this collectively for the podcast. I say got picked like someone in the audience just like sent us a suggestion and we went, oh yeah, that one. But because it's such a well-known entity and because it is so tied to childhood, I think, that I thought it was interesting. I couldn't believe you hadn't seen the movie. Yeah,
and it was in the wake of, obviously, post Lord of the Rings, so... You know, fantasy properties are...
Same time,
yeah, because the first Lord of the Rings was 2002, so it would be the same, those sequential years.
Yeah, kind of all in that bucket, as it were.
Yeah, so, you know, the high fantasy story, multiple part franchise movies were sort of becoming very en vogue at the time. And,
en vogue.
And obviously, you know, British stories, Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia, both published around similar times, both in the 50s originally. The Hobbit was way earlier, but the Lord of the Rings trilogy was more, I believe, the mid-50s. I looked it up yesterday when Tolkien had released those. So it was in the wake of the Narnia book series, but Tolkien had been working on it for like a decade after The Hobbit. So movie-wise, it was right in the time where these sorts of things were starting to really pick up steam. Lord of the Rings had just won a bunch of Oscars and huge notoriety. Chronicles of Narnia would sort of keep that going, and then there would be others, the Hunger Games wouldn't be too far off of this, etc., etc.
Yeah, it does kind of lean into a specific genre, and also a whole series of books that are written by she who shall not be named now.
Yes,
because
we will not be doing any films set at Hogwarts.
Can't get down with turf politics. I just can't do it.
Yeah.
Brother-in-law, if you're listening to this, you heard none of that. Because Lord knows, the last thing I need you to know is that I don't like something. There's a history. For those of you who know me and are listening to this, you will know the history. For the rest of you, just know that making fun of one another is how my brother-in-law and I show love. Anyway, so to bring it back, interesting that you mentioned the high fantasy thing too, because there's a whole host of humans that I know and love that I work with who cannot wrap their head around the fact that I also am not a fan of high fantasy. So
yeah, it's never really been my thing. When I was young, I did read the Lord of the Rings books and The Hobbit.
Yeah, same.
Going back to it, it must have sort of been not out of obligation necessarily, but it was something very different than I was reading. And read it, and it did not inspire me to go back and read anything else. And it's sort of the same with science fiction, although interestingly, I probably have watched a lot more science fiction movies than I have fantasy movies.
Interesting.
Take that for what it's worth.
Yeah. And I'm sure you want to talk about this later, so I don't want to dig into it too far right now, but I just find that interesting, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Also because I needed to know, and you looked it up, but it's important for me to fact check you after everybody was not really dead, is that the first Lord of the Rings novel was published in 1954, and the first Lord of the Rings movie was 2001. So you were
2001. Okay.
Real close.
2002 Oscars, 2001 movie. That
tracks.
Sense. Yeah.
But yeah, they were all in the same.
Yeah.
They're all kind of that same time.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because they're all, I think, in similar ways dealing with stuff that's happening.
Absolutely.
I won't say anything else.
No, and that's sort of actually, you have given me the perfect segue for kind of my first couple of points. Similarly to a lot of stories sort of written in that time period, obviously we're starting off in, at that point, post-war or during the war London, I guess, in terms of this story, where the London Blitz is happening, and the children are sent away on a train with tags from winners on their clothes, apparently, to make sure they go to the right place, and are basically sent to live in various places in the countryside, which is a real thing. It happened during World War II to sort of, keep the children of London safe. So that was it was a well documented thing. I sort of forgot that that's where this story starts.
It's funny that you say that. My note is I kind of forgot the sads that start this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You get caught up in this sort of side or parallel tale and kind of forget.
Yes.
What exists to start this movie, and then when it started, I was like, oh. Right.
Yeah.
So I feel you.
Mm-hmm. And it's probably one of the reasons why this story resonated as long as it did, because it is very much a story of escapism for children in a very grim world, and one where they're facing a reality where their father is at war and their mother has stayed back in London, and they know that there are bombs that are being dropped, and who knows what home looks like. They say that at one point in time. So they are sent to live in the countryside with the professor, whose name I'm forgetting, but it's Jim Broadbent's character, and his housekeeper, who apparently thinks he is not to be disturbed ever under any circumstances, and every time he sees the children, he seems delighted by them. So
Mrs. McCree's just trying to run a house in 1940s English countryside. Leave the woman alone.
Yeah. No, that's and that it goes into my first note, and this is from this movie, but also got reinforced from another movie that I had watched relatively recently. Old British society sucks.
I mean, based on some conversations I've had with some current friends, I think current British society isn't a whole lot different sometimes.
Well, and it's interesting to dive into a country society that isn't our own, because you hear it second and third hand and through stories like this and everything else. But for a country like England, like the UK in general, to have had such a like cultural impact on things like film, stage, music, very like literature, there's such a massive influence on English language culture that comes from the United Kingdom and various parts of it. And most of it comes from periods either from a very, very long time ago or from periods after the war, once the UK came out of rationing and a lot of the societal things that were crumbling and the church influence and all of the things. Like I remember the Monty Python documentary I have, they talk a lot about them starting to be comedians when they're in university at Oxford and at Cambridge, and how like they were coming out of a very deferential society that was tutting any sort of like, oh well, we can't have this sort of frivolity and blah blah, like very stuffy, coming into something that was much more open. You know, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who coming out of music, punk rock coming out of it in the 70s. You have all of these other movements of, you know, actors that have become sort of gone from being like Laurence Olivier in that society to then becoming older and doing wacky shit as an actor.
I do love Laurence Olivier.
Yeah.
Also, I just want to... You aren't a fan of Monty Python, are you?
A tiny bit.
Weird.
Small Monty Python fan since I was about 12 years old or younger.
Oh, since you were small.
Very little, yes. But that absurdism in humor and a lot of things that came from Britain came from the fact that their society was so stuffy and was so repressed and so regimented for a lot of years, even before World War I and World War II. But World War II specifically, with the bombing of London, had really a lot of people having to go into rationing, having to pull their bootstraps in, and you were basically there to obey what you were told, as it would have been since the medieval times in England.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm reminded of a documentary that a friend of mine referred me to. Mm-hmm. And I think is subsequently an Instagram account called Very British Problems.
Oh, okay.
So that's props to Jamie for sending that to me. Mm-hmm. I don't know that he listens to this, but if he does, I love you. Thank you.
Shout out.
And it's this whole kind of, even now, it's the, like, this is a very British problem where it's like someone's cut in front of you in the queue. Mm-hmm. And how do you handle that? And it's like, just stew, be angry. Like, what else do you do? So I think that's kind of what I mean by I think some of that repression hangs out. Yes. And arguably, and I think this is true in a lot of places, Canada included, but British society tends to be organized very much by class. Yes. And that doesn't necessarily mean dollars. It means the way you present yourself.
Social standing. Yeah.
Exactly. But to go back to this point of, you know, when this is, like, British society sucks because Mrs. McCready's angry. Mm-hmm. Are children to be seen and not heard?
Oh my God, absolutely. And there is it's a super famous kind of riot girly type of song called "Oh Bondage Up Yours" by X-Ray Specs that starts out with the phrase, "Some little girls should be seen and not heard," while I say, "Oh bondage up yours." And it then rips into it. It's a great line, and it's a female-fronted band, so, like, Polystyrene was her stage name, and she's phenomenal.
You would have somehow connected this back to music. Well done.
But it is very much that, right? Like, children should be seen and not heard. I mean, this is a society where up until... more recently than even this story is that you basically sent your children away to go to school so that you didn't have to really worry about parenting them a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I think that's true of a lot of places. That's not just British.
Yeah. Not
just the UK, because I think I've been recently rewatching Mad Men because it was just the 10th anniversary of the final episode, actually.
There you go.
Which, again, you want to talk about things that make us feel old, but... And that similar idea of, like, children should be seen and not heard, you see a lot in the Betty Draper, Don Draper household.
Yes.
So I think that was kind of post-war war, like during the war thing. I think that happened a lot in
Yes.
that kind of segment of life. And then you end up with things like punk rock, et cetera, which I think is great because can you imagine me being seen and not heard? But it's it's an interesting reminder, I think.
And it came on the heels of me actually watching another movie on my own without you.
Whoa, you do that?
Well, you go to bed way earlier than I do.
I don't understand.
I know.
I go to bed at regular people time.
No, I watched a kind of a more classic film from the late 60s, early 70s, I think, called The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, which stars a very young Maggie Smith. She won an Academy Award for Best Actress for it, and is... I don't know if it's responsible for her being a big actor both in the US and in the UK, but it was made by 20th Century Fox, so it was a US bankrolled kind of partially funded movie. And the whole story is based on quite a famous play about Miss Jean Brodie, who is a fictitious teacher, and she's teaching young girls that are sent to this school. You don't really ever see any of their parents, so it's sort of assumed that they're maybe living in a dormitory, maybe just walking to school from home. Don't really know what it is. But it takes place in between World War I and World War II in Edinburgh. And you very much get the sense of that these children are just wholly unsupervised and being seen and not heard everywhere except for school, where in school they are even further repressed with their teachings and their teachers and the administration at the school. And Miss Jean Brodie is this incredibly naive woman that is trying to fill them with the appreciation of beauty and light and love and grace. And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie and want to, just, cover your ears. Having an ideal look at fascism. There's parts in the movie where she just talks about the great Italian leader, Benito Mussolini.
Oh, you know the guy. He was super lovely.
Yeah.
Big fan.
And the fascisti and these wonderful people that are fighting against the status quo. And she's teaching this to these impressionable girls in like elementary school age. And until later on with other circumstances has no concept really that this is a bad idea. Because it's 1931 Scotland and she's naive and just traveled to Italy in the summer and it was so lovely, and I must teach these children about this wonderful country and their amazing leader, Benito Mussolini. So there's a certain amount of like unchecked, whether it's parenting, whether it's children being supervised properly, whether it's parents being involved enough, that from what I've understood about anything I've seen of that period in English history, seems to be pretty true.
Fair. I'm sure that we will have some friends who call us out on this or
Please
have
do.
thoughts about it. Yeah. We love to talk about it. I have a note, and it kind of ties into something later in the film as well, but I think plays in here.
Yeah.
Why can't you just do what you're told?
Yes.
Right? And so you've got this older brother kind
Peter.
of forced into this role of being the parent for... I think partly because maybe like repressed and children seen, not heard, etc., and partly just because of the circumstances in which they find themselves.
Has to.
And it's not anybody's fault in that case. Like they've just survived the Blitz. Now they have to go be safe somewhere else.
Yep.
Dad is at war. Like there's all these things going on, right? But when he says to his younger brother, "Why can't you just do what you're told?"
Yeah.
It's that idea that that's what you're supposed to do. You just do what you're told.
Yep. And even the young girl, who is the one sort of bringing these fantastical ideas of finding Narnia through a wardrobe. Her older sister, who's not the oldest, but is the older of the two girls, also kind of says the same thing about like, this is just nonsense. Why are you telling us this? This is frivolous. We
have
can't
no time for frivolity.
Yeah, we can't expect us to believe you when you say these things. So yeah, their repression is strong in a lot of ways, which, I mean, even Narnia itself is completely reminiscent of certain aspects of England because C.S. Lewis was English and this is based in that area. So
well, and isn't it an allegory? Anyhow.
Well, and it does again kind of go with the when Narnia is discovered, when Lucy playing hide-seek goes into the wardrobe with all of the fur coats and just essentially backs into Narnia, which is fully in absolutely the dead of an incredibly long winter. And she gets into this winter with so much snow, and clearly it's not very warm looking. And she is absolutely delighted in every single way. And the only thing I could think of is, like, is England become so drab that the absolute dead of the coldest winter, of which you and I in Canada know very, very well, is just preferable to living in a mansion in the English countryside?
I think too, because the reason they're playing, so it's funny that you say that, because I had a similar thought. The reason they're playing hide and seek is because it's pouring rain outside, right?
Yeah.
And I have had the thought, and I've actually written down, says a lot about England's weather that snow is the preferable option.
Oh yeah. Like, I will gladly freeze my feet off, but as long as they're not wet.
I mean, wet and hysterical.
Yeah.
To be fair, if your feet are wet, they may also freeze off. That's not the point. Yeah, I thought it was funny too, where she just... Now, partly isn't that bad being in England, but also the eyes of a child, right? Everything
Yes.
is wondrous when you're... I don't even know how old Lucy is in this.
No, probably
But quite young.
Quite young, I would imagine. And you're right. Like, you're seeing the imagination of a child, and wow, this is absolutely fantastical. And the kind of winter that it is not the kind of winter you would see in England, maybe other than the more northern, remote parts of the kingdom, getting into Scotland and whatnot. You don't quite have the dumps of snow that we get here that stay, because a lot of times they're very moist and they're either going to melt away or just become rain or other moisture when it gets a little warmer in the rain.
We had to pick the word moist. You couldn't have gone with damp or humidity or anything else.
Moist.
Why? Why do you hate me?
Moisture.
I thought, well, see, moisture isn't as weird. The word moist, though, anybody who knows me knows that it gives me the heebs, so thanks for that.
You're welcome. I did actually have to question whether or not British children are just immune to the cold, though.
You did ask that out loud at one point last night, yeah.
Yeah, we don't really have any time frame for how long they are in Narnia in different points, because when they do leave back through the wardrobe entrance, no time has passed in reality. When Lucy's having tea with Mr. Tumnus, you don't really know how long that time frame is. It could be hours, because he sort of plays the tune on his flute and she goes to sleep because he's potentially going to turn her over to the White Witch. But she just wakes up and the fire's out, and it's clearly later on. But, like, was it an hour later? Was it 2 days later? We don't really know.
Correct. I think, too, interesting, are children in the UK immune to the cold, or is Lucy immune to the cold because this is an imagination situation?
Oh, it absolutely is. Until they mention several times about, I'm so cold. And it's like, you don't have anything to keep you warm.
But they do. There are coats.
Well, there eventually are coats. And they do go traipsing around in coats, all of which fit the children except for Edmund, the younger of the boys, who has such an oversized, I want to say it looked like an ermine coat, maybe a gray one, that is a lady's coat, that is so large that while he's walking, he looks like a chubby multi-penguin with the gray fluff, like, out 3 times the size of any other baby penguin around the herd.
I love penguins.
Yes.
Remember, what was his name? The big fluffy one that happened at the same time as the pygmy hippopotamus.
Yes. I don't remember the name.
Well, now I have to look it up. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I know this is not related to this podcast at all.
It was Mudang, and it wasn't... Anyways, we may or may not find this name out. But yeah, again, if you're going to play the card of, well, this is winter, but we're still warm and we're immune to it because we're humans and it's Narnia winter, that's fine. But they refer to all of this time about how cold they are. And when they, go on an ice floe for a trip down the river to escape the wolves, and then get out, and all of their coats are really, really wet. And Lucy's coat is not there, and they're looking for her, and she says, I'm so cold, do you have my coat? You're soaking wet, Lucy. It's the middle of winter. A wet coat is not going to help you.
Yes, but see, it's convenient because then they no longer need the coats because now it's warm.
Then it is warm. But...
weird. It's almost like it's made up. Also,
yeah.
Because it's important to me, and you may keep this in here or you may not, that penguin's name was Pesto.
Pesto,
the giant multi-penguin. Edmund shall now be called Pesto. The end.
From here on out.
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, they're again, not really a long point with that one. We're just Canadian. I look at that and just go like, oh, you kids are outside like they are popsicles.
You've lost toes. Like if you're actually out there like that, you have
send your toes to Dawson City so people can take shots with them.
Gross.
Yeah.
Ew. Well, that feels like an appropriate time to move to your next point.
Let's move to my next point, yeah. In another very short point about things that are maybe a little unfortunate that probably help at least one character keep a little bit of warm. It's probably in fashion for Mr. Tumnus and all of the other fawns in the area, but man, the back hair treasure trail is a look.
Oh, I think that's a fawn thing, actually.
I think it is, but just the first time you sort of see it, and of course, James McAvoy playing Mr. Tumnus, has deer hoofs for feet, so, we're already suspending disbelief. But the straight up and down the spine treasure trail of fawn hair with just human back skin on the rest of it is a choice.
Well, he has a scarf, so he's set.
He does have a scarf, and he also has a home that he can keep himself away from the cold, so that probably helps too.
A warm fire where he can play Narnia lullabies and kidnap human children.
He also just does look a little like he has a very long hair that's formed into a rat tail. So he didn't own a large black van. If he had owned one of those, I would be worried with a rat tail.
I mean, the fact that he tries to kidnap Lucy at the beginning, should you not be worried about his pseudo-rat tail anyway?
I mean, he immediately has a change of heart, so I think we enjoy. And poor little James McAvoy, he's very emotional. He's very weepy.
Wee baby James McAvoy.
He feels all of the emotions.
I actually have a note, and I don't know if you want to dig into him feeling all the emotions. I just made a note because it makes me giggle.
Yeah.
I was like, oh boy, fawns might also need therapy.
Oh boy.
Watching this as an adult now, I'm like, oh boy.
Yeah, there's a lot of... You just know that even the children that, find themselves in Narnia when they go back, there's going to be some... Maybe Narnia was their therapy. Maybe they would have been grown up more well-adjusted because they fought off the hordes of the White Witch.
And her varying uncomfortable creatures.
Who knows?
Well, yeah, there's no notes there other than I giggled at that one.
Yeah. The White Witch actually kind of comes up next for me because at this point in the story... Lucy's playing hide and seek. She's gone to Narnia, met Mr. Tumnus. He's let her go back. He's chosen not to kidnap her, even though the White Witch, whom we have not met yet, has decreed that any humans are to be kidnapped and brought to her immediately. But he lets Lucy go. Lucy goes back, tells her brothers and sister about Narnia. Nobody believes her. Her younger brother, Edmund, who is the one that will not behave, will not do what he's told, decides that he wants to go in to Narnia, or see what is in this wardrobe, going after, I believe Lucy goes back.
Yes, I was like, I don't think he so much decides to go in as he does to follow his little sister.
Yeah, so she wants to go back because nobody believes her, and Mr. Tumnus was just a nice, fond man to her. And so she decides to go back in the middle of the night, and Edmund goes after her and goes into the room with the wardrobe. She's not there, so he is suspicious, walks into the wardrobe, and now he is in Narnia as well. And instead of following Lucy, because he doesn't know how, the White Witch comes barreling in on her sleigh with white reindeer, I think. I don't think it's unicorns. Those come later.
No, it's not unicorns.
Yeah, looked like white reindeer and her henchmen.
Yes.
And essentially, she is quite nice to Edmund, asking, what is it that he wants? And he wants something warm to drink, so she conjures up a hot chocolate for him to have. And then he wants Turkish Delight, which for years and years after I read this book, I just equated what he was eating with the Big Turk chocolate bar, because that's what we have in Canada. We don't really have, actual Turkish Delight, which is much more of a soft gelatin-based candy that has powdered sugar all around it, which, despite its name, I think is a very British thing.
I think so, but I also did the same. In my head, it was the Big Turk chocolate bar, which, for the record, my mom loves. I cannot stand.
I liked them when I was a kid. Haven't had one in forever. I actually don't even think I've had an authentic Turkish Delight now that I think about it.
Well, we should order some for the photos of this for the Instagram.
I wonder if anybody in town makes authentic Turkish Delight.
Well, this has been a weird path to go down. We might need to make dinner. Anyway.
Yeah, Baker Talk with Jess and Matt. So they give him the candy and the hot chocolate, and she's very nice to him, and he mentions that he's trying to find his sister, and the White Witch says, when you find her, please bring her to me. My castle is between the two peaks of these mountains in the distance, trying to entice him to be kind to her and giving him promises of, maybe one day you will rule this land. So doing the old dangle the carrot in front of Edmund.
Or the dangle the Turkish Delight, as it were.
Yes.
Rooms filled with stuff to the brim with Turkish Delight.
Yeah. So eventually Edmund does bring them through the wardrobe, even though, after he's found his sister and brought her back, he kind of fibs and says, no, it's not actually real. They end up back in the wardrobe, all four of them, and discover, Narnia is a real thing. Lucy wasn't lying. Edmund knew it as well. And away they go, but they suddenly find themselves in the midst of scandal and potential secret police plot because Mr. Tumnus has been captured and has been ordered to be put to death by the White Witch.
I don't know that is specifically laid out, but yes, he's definitely captured, and it's going to be bad news for Tumnus.
Yeah, for treason. He had alerted her that he captured a human and then let the human go. So he's been captured. He is in jail. And suddenly they're going to go help Mr. Tumnus and don't know much about it until they run across the talking beaver that has come to find them to keep them safe because the White Witch is coming after them. Well, specifically the committee of the police wolves. The wolves seem to be the law and order for the White Witch.
The Gestapo wolves.
The Gestapo wolves. We'll call them the Gestapo wolves. Sure, that
I
works.
mean...
And so they go on the run with the talking beaver to his home.
What a sentence.
The dam. Very intricate dam.
I mean, it's winter. He's got to do something.
Yeah. I'm tempted to mention the joke we've seen on social media where do you think a beaver looks at a running river and just says, absolutely not.
The thing I think perhaps most disappointed in this movie and the rewatch is that there's not hundreds of beavers.
Man, that's another reference to hundreds of beavers. They might owe us some royalties. If enough of our friends go see the movie, we might have to hit them up.
But how will they track it to us? Anyway.
Anyways, part of what's going on at the same time is that Edmund is trying to either subvert a plan or throw them off the trail or eventually just abandon them because he wants to go to the White Witch's palace for more Turkish Delight. Because Edmund is the youngest and is very naive, and youngest of the boys, I guess.
There you go.
And is more naive and doesn't like that his brother is bossy, and so he's going to show him by leaving and go eating all of the candy. And when he eventually gets to the White Witch's castle, she suddenly is not so kind to him because he didn't bring his siblings.
Strange.
She gets super mad and starts being a little more aggressive with, your loyalty to me. How could you do this to me? And the note I have here is again, something talking about British society and the sort of on both sides of this story, the White Witch, as well as eventually Aslan, who is
Aslan.
the leader. Is not called the king of the other side, but is the leader of
He is at one
of
point called the
good.
true king of Narnia.
Yeah. Just the absolute, like, complete willingness to blindly follow the first monarch they see. And boy, if there's not a more British coded thing in a society, I don't know what is.
Well, and I think if we're going to talk about, yeah, fair, but if we're going to talk about leaders that are coded as well, right? Mm-hmm. Think about who the White Witch is standing in for.
Absolutely.
And how does she gain her power? It's not necessarily because she said, I am the true one queen, although she clearly does do that.
She does do that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm not arguing she doesn't do it, but I don't think that's the reason that all the weird little outcasts, for lack of a better term here, follow her.
Yeah.
It's because she's promised them a place where they can finally have power. What does that sound like?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And gross that it is deeply upsetting to me that we can watch this movie, talk about this book, and again, it's been a long time since I revisited the book, and there's stuff that's likely not the same, and we can talk about that after.
Yeah.
But that the allegory for which this movie stands in, or the thing that this movie stands in for, or that Narnia stands in for, that it's still appropriate today is really upsetting.
Yes.
It is deeply upsetting that you can draw parallels from the Blitz in London in 1940 to gestures broadly at everything going on right now in 2025.
Yes.
Deeply upsetting.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And it does, I mean, there you could probably read into some very specific characters and talk about Aslan the Lion being, in some ways a pretty clear stand-in for Churchill in the rah-rah rally around this, this person of nobility against this evil that is very much like cold and icy and even like angular in design in a lot of ways, whether it's a chariot or anything else, and not sort of an overpowering fear standing in for the fear of, the Nazi threat and the World War II threat of fascism taking over.
The fascisti.
The fascisti. And it plays in some funny ways. Tilda Swinton is a wonderful actor. And I think she was a very good choice for the White Witch because she is very, very good at being angry a lot without being one note, which is a good change especially for a kid's movie. You probably don't necessarily... You think of maybe a more comical villain that is just, I am evil, ha 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 ha. And no, she's just kind of genuinely there to kill everyone.
Yeah, she's there for the power.
Yeah.
Right?
And, that would have been quite terrifying. And, of this story being an allegory for the times that it was set in. Absolutely on the nose.
Tilda Swinton is on my list, and I love Tilda Swinton.
She's wonderful.
I think one of the best casting choices in this movie.
I would probably argue the best as the actual actors go. Like of the people playing a person in the film, she is pretty head and shoulders above anybody else. And she's amazing. She also has tremendous range. Like I think a lot of people saw her for the first time in this film, because she was a pretty well-known actress, but not always necessarily in high-profile films. She was doing a lot of independent stuff in, various countries in Europe, certainly, but she, didn't have any real awards recognition over here at this point. She was, if you went to the Cannes Film Festival, you'd know Tilda Swinton, but if you didn't, you probably wouldn't have seen something like some of her early stuff before she got into this, and then eventually winning an Oscar for Michael Clayton and being in some higher profile films as a lead, like We Need to Talk About Kevin, which is very disturbing, but she's very good in it. Yeah, so she's a standout in every way.
She's also phenomenal in Orlando. That is all.
I haven't seen Orlando, actually.
Wow, I can't believe you haven't seen Orlando.
I mean, I can. I don't even know that I've heard of that movie before.
Well, I'm going to put that one on the list.
I did find it quite interesting with relation to Tilda Swinton and the angularness that I mentioned.
Yeah.
She has a very interesting dress.
It's very sharp.
It's very sharp. Very, like, I'm not a fashion person, so I wouldn't really know. I know, shocking. Like, it's very, the neckline of the dress sort of comes out a little bit, but also is like I really don't know how to describe it. It's like a hat. It's like there's a very hard top to the round top of her dress that makes it seem like it may have been hard to walk around in.
It's very structured.
Yeah, very structured. And she was in it a long time. That might have been a chore to act in.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I don't know.
I would imagine.
But yeah, her dress at that point, sort of after first meeting Edmund before they go into the big battle at the end, is quite the thing. And I mean, it makes sense that she would take it off before they do go into the final battle. You mentioned the word allegory before.
Several times at this point, yes.
And this story is absolutely... Allegory is a great descriptor for this story because I think it's an allegory for a lot of different things. And, you know, the wonder of childhood, about the repression of society, about a lot of, you know, obeying royalty and your elders and a lot of different things. But I think the thing that struck me in watching this that I would not have picked up on, I would have been too young to pick up on when I read it, is how much this story is a real allegory for the concept of war.
Yes.
And the idea that it is like not necessarily just an accepted part of life, but something that it is accepted as a part of life, and everyone has a role in it, including the youngest child in a family.
Yeah.
You know, given a small dagger and being told, I hope you don't have to use this, but she still has it, and, you know, has a potion that will help to heal anyone that has a wound one time, which is, you know, like, okay, sure. But then everybody is given some sort of a title and a weapon and a standing and a skill to practice to essentially be part of a war, which in Narnia's case is the war between the White Witch's faction and Aslan's faction, good and evil, you know, as plain as day. But also a lot of other aspects of it, of, you know, things like there being rationing and are we taking enough food? Like Mrs. Beaver's trying to take food with them so that they can last for a longer period. Like there's these threads that run through a lot of it that just scream of the like, well, we must endure, and so in order to do that through these hard times, we need to take what we can without burdening ourselves. And, you know, because it's set in World War II, obviously that was happening on the front lines. It was happening at the home front. It was even happening in North America before, you know, when we were sending soldiers off and making munitions to send over. You know, you would have rations in order to be able to send more to the boys overseas.
I think the place that I see it, or not even the place that I see it the most, but having now gone back and watched this again 20 years later, and I'm sure I've seen it more than once, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
And I haven't reread the book in many moons. Mm-hmm. There is a lot where I'm like, oh, right, that's what's happening here. Because again, you kind of forget that it starts with the Blitz, right? Mm-hmm. It's when Beaver and Mrs. Beaver, meet the Beavers, have the escape tunnel under the dam.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that to me was very much, especially if you go back to the beginning of the movie, when they have the bunker, mm-hmm. and it's like, oh, this was just a part of everyone's life.
Yeah. And it's a fun way to do it because animals tunneling is not a new thing. I mean, we both love Fantastic Mr. Fox. There's a whole section of that movie that talks about animals tunneling, but
and being different.
God, that movie's great.
But it's a good way of I don't want to say making it palatable, because I don't know that that's necessarily the word, but it's a good way of putting it into a children's book where kids can understand it.
Yes.
Right? It's and into a children's movie, really, because the movie came out in 2005 and wasn't necessarily marketed to adults.
No, and wasn't made like it's for it. There are some movies like Inside Out that we did recently that very much is made with kids in mind, but also their parents.
This one is not.
This is a kids movie through and through.
It's true, and I love it for that. I think sometimes it's okay that it's just a kids movie. It's just a kids book. But that it's solely a kids property, so to speak. But yeah, I knew it, but I forgot it. And rewatching it as an adult, even because, I mean, when it came out, I would not have been a young child as a movie. No. The book, yes, of course. Yeah. When the movie came out, I wasn't a young being. But as a much more older, as a middle-aged woman now, looking back at that or watching it again and again, also in our current socio-political climate, it's easy to go, oh shit.
Yeah.
Right? That's something that would have been part of everybody's day. And you knew when you had to hit the bunker and where you could go to get away. And you think about hidden spaces and how people hide in them and survived things like Nazi raids by being in attics or being under floorboards or all these sorts of things, right?
Yeah.
So,
and there's some interesting kind of war coded things and British society coded things when to do with war. You know, when they get to the camp, Aslan's camp. With of all of the army of animals and centaurs and everybody that's fighting on the side of good. You get there and it's almost as if you've just come across Sherwood Forest and it's Robin Hood and his merry men. You have those tents that are very Robin Hood. You have the hierarchy of, well, the largest tent on the top of the hill is the leader, and that's where Aslan is. So there's some very interesting things with that. The final battle of the film that, where they kind of meet near the mountaintop and the plane that comes down, is a little bit, and I picked up on a couple of these from having done shout out to, I don't remember my professor's name for this, but my 20th century warfare course that I took in university, because I used to be a social studies teacher and I have useless knowledge because of it.
True.
The battle that they actually wage is very interestingly a 1800s pre-World War I sort of formation.
Absolutely it is.
And, having and they even mentioned to Peter, because he's now the leader with Aslan not there, of what is going to be our plan. And the hordes from the White Witch are coming in very sort of flat, like they would have maybe been with a marching band in previous time. Then it was just they were running as fast as polar bears can run, because polar bears were pulling the chariots.
I mean, to be fair, they were pulling her chariot, and she didn't give a shit about getting there any faster.
Yeah.
She was just sitting there telling other people to die on her behalf. So
that's fair. But the good side, the one that Peter is leading, is actually going towards them in more of a point formation, which in something like that, the idea is that if you are an army on horseback, or if you have something where you think you're faster, to combat that, you would try and poke through that.
Interesting.
And then infiltrate the middle of the people behind. I kind of learned a little bit of that as to, this is how it used to be, and then World War I happened, and that's why they dug the trenches.
Because there was trench warfare.
And that was completely different, and World War II changed that as well. But there's actually parts of World War II that come into that whole battle sequence.
Yeah.
And the filmmaker really, Adamson really goes in there and be like, hey, do you remember the shot we had from us dropping bombs from a Messerschmitt over London? That same shot is the griffins that are flying over dropping rocks, and they use the same perspective. It uses the same, almost wonder if I went back and put
shot
them
for
side,
shot
if it was the almost same CGI back to back, just with different models to stand into, because it felt like it was very similar.
Yeah, even if it's not exactly the same, it absolutely has the same vibe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a lot of sort of very specific war-coded things in there, and it's melding old, it's melding current day for World War II. There's a lot in there, and it makes sense given that this is a story of children's imagination trying to escape reality, but it's like when you have a weird dream, mostly you dream about some of the weird things you were thinking about in the last 2 days.
Yeah, it's children trying to understand war.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So it's allegory is a good word for it. I think that's very apt, and there's a lot coded into there about war specifically.
Thank you. You know, you have the 20th century warfare. I have an English degree, so every once in a while I have to pull out the good words.
This is why we make a fun podcast, because we never know where our conversation's going to go, because we have a bunch of random useless knowledge.
I would argue useful, but you know, you do you, fam.
Useful for this podcast, apparently.
We're not saying anything new when we talk about it being an allegory for war, because that's well documented. But,
absolutely.
But it's easy to forget it when you get caught up in the fantasy part, especially as a kid.
And it's easy to forget it when it is very much a property for kids.
Yes.
Right? Like it, as much as it is a well-known novel series, you have other series that are fantasy novels that go across the board of, oh, well, as an adult, I'm going to go back and read whichever novel series, because like you can be an adult and go back and read a young adult series like The Hunger Games and absolutely get a ton out of it.
And I have a professor friend who I think would have a lot of thoughts about that.
Yes, you do. And I'm sure you've had many conversations with her.
It's kind of her area of specialty, and she's a badass. So,
yeah.
You know.
It's great. Shout out. But it also is not I don't feel like the Narnia series is a book series you often hear adults being like, I'm really interested to go back and read the Chronicles of Narnia.
I think that's fair. I kind of want to now. Like, I do want to go back and read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe now. Just because I also remember having a very visceral reaction to parts of that book.
Yeah.
And I didn't, for obvious reasons, for the purposes of this podcast, but... But yeah, it's not one that you hear, even on a high fantasy kind of note.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's because you and I aren't particularly high fantasy fans, but fantasy fans is a weird thing. We're not necessarily in that camp, but I think even from a high fantasy, right? We talk about the property that happens at Hogwarts. That that was a cultural phenomenon for a lot of people our age in particular.
Yep.
That still go back and rewatch it and... feel how you want to feel. We're not going to go into that. The point is, that is something that I know people, adults, go back and revisit.
Yep.
Lord of the Rings, from a high fantasy perspective, that's not necessarily geared to children.
No.
But it is something that people go back and rewatch, right?
Yeah.
And reread and revisit. And they turned The Hobbit into 3 movies, and let's not talk about it. But there's a lot of those sorts of things that people go back and revisit. And I think you're right, and it may just be the folks that we know when we've talked to about this.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've heard the same sort of revisit, rewatch, retelling, what have you, of Narnia. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, not for lack of the author necessarily, because it's C.S. Lewis. He's a very big deal.
Did he do some other stuff?
A few things. Yes, he did a few things. But yeah, it doesn't seem like it was part of that groundswell of rediscovering children's literature that has lived on for a long time. So it is interesting in that way to see the war allegories and not have it be something that is part of what people would revisit. Yeah. No, it's very interesting. I think there's a lot to talk about there.
I had to go back and take a look at this because of my brain. 2 things. One of his notable works, and I had to check it, is it literally called The Allegory of blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So I think that's hilarious.
You might have a type.
Yeah, and, probably a well-known fact, but something I've forgotten. C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were buddies.
Yes, very much friends. The Hobbit walked so Narnia could run.
Yeah, it's kind of awesome, actually, in hindsight. Anyway, sorry for the small derailing on our good friend C.S. Lewis. But,
nope, that's okay. Other than talking about specifically about war and trying to work out your C.S. Lewis's thoughts of war or a children's
I think
perspective of war.
Figure out how he feels about it, but yeah.
I do have to wonder with Edmund, who, went to some hardship to get his way all the way to the White Witch's castle, just for that sweet, sweet Turkish delight at the end of the valley,
Rainbow.
I guess.
Yeah.
And he never gets it and is shackled in jail and punished and now realizes that, I shouldn't have been so taken in by just wanting to get candy. Was this the earliest version of a subliminal message for British children to eat less sweets?
You don't get fat, you'll get caught by the White Witch.
Yeah.
Maybe. I have thoughts about Edmund, but...
Yeah, there's a lot in there talking about Edmund. I made that as a note, being I wonder if there was any ulterior motives or maybe there was a candy company that came up afterwards in the 50s and went, we would really like to license this for, not a candy company, I guess, but maybe
turns into Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah, could be. Anyways.
This has got some Charlie and the Chocolate Factory vibes, which,
yes,
now that we're talking about it, hilarious. Weird.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Unknown property.
As
well. Yeah.
Never been done before or since. Never. Although I haven't seen the Chalamet Wonka. Maybe it's wonderful.
Nor have I.
Yeah. I had another note of something that's that does run parallel in my brain to Lord of the Rings, because there is a lot of pairings between the two properties, obviously, both when they were books and obviously when they were movies, because...
Yeah, it's all similar timing.
Yeah. This movie series, whereas I said The Hobbit walked so Narnia could run, the movies for the Lord of the Rings trilogy walked so that Chronicles of Narnia, another one, could maybe not run, but also walk in the same shoes.
Could exist, yeah.
Yeah, and it does give way to a running series of properties of whether it's literature or even just original films that then become a series, where it's recurring films where the stories build on top of each other, and it is very CGI heavy in its imagery. This is just prior to the start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe era. There was, the Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films were around.
We hadn't had Iron Man or whatever.
Yeah, Iron Man hadn't come out yet. That didn't really exist, and I think that was able to be the success it is because of a lot of reasons, but The Lord of the Rings is a big part of that, and seeing the successes of other properties like this film helped, certainly.
2008 Iron Man, I had to check.
Yeah, and I think, there was other comic book movies before that, like I said, Spider-Man.
But I think the big one, if we're talking Marvel Cinematic Universe, that kicks it off is the first
Iron Man was the real start. Yeah.
Sorry, I feel like you had a different point, and now I'm talking about...
No, I'm getting into
Downey.
more... No, and I'm getting more into just the idea of longer-running series that become multiple movies. To this movie's credit, it does stand alone as its own movie very well. You don't have to watch the other two to get everything out of this one without there being a dangling carrot in the middle of, but what about? But they talked about this and they didn't do anything.
Yep.
Oh, I have to tune in next week on Batman. That's what it feels like sometimes, the old Adam West Batmans.
Same bad times.
And it's the same reason that I kind of stopped watching Marvel movies, is that I felt like a third of the movie was setting up the next three movies.
Absolutely, they are. That's what they do.
Yeah. I recently listened to an episode of another movie podcast I love called The Rewatchables. They just did an episode about Star Wars.
Word up to the Rewatchables.
Rewatchables team. You guys are phenomenal. And they talked about how, the original Star Wars, A New Hope, 1977, clearly is a huge cultural touchstone. It also essentially has created what is probably one of the worst times to go to the movies, with nothing but franchise movies and nothing but sequels and nothing but recurring stories that you have to watch 5 other movies to get any semblance of plot line
right, you
from.
have to have all the background to be able to get to
Yeah, so it's, people call it it's great, but it meant all of this schlock and all of these other decisions. And Lord of the Rings was a step along the way to that, certainly, where they were hugely successful, hugely critically acclaimed, won all of the awards. It was a big deal. And to this movie's credit, if this was the only one that was made, you wouldn't be missing anything.
Yeah. The Lord of the Rings.
The Lord of the Rings.
Sorry, I just remember. So we went to see this. My childhood best friends and I saw this movie together. Mm-hmm. We also saw The Lord of the Rings together. Mm-hmm. And one of them fell asleep in the first one.
See, that I can understand that. The Fellowship has some spots where it is slower because the story starts off slower.
It's just funny because I think the first one she fell asleep in, and if she's listening, she'll know exactly who she is and be amused by this conversation. Mm-hmm. And in the last one, they have like 4 fake endings, and at one point, I think she turned to me and said, "Why isn't this over yet?" So yeah, mm-hmm.
Yeah. Return of the King has a Hideo Kojima of an ending.
It does. Anyway, sure. Sorry, that's a complete sidebar.
But the thing that in this film does end up standing out to me, and I haven't watched The Lord of the Rings in a long time. I'm not a rewatcher of it.
Go back and rewatch, yeah.
I do think they're really well done films, and I think the CGI in them is pretty extraordinary, especially given the time.
I think the films are extraordinary, and the care that's given to the story is extraordinary.
Yes, it absolutely is. Peter Jackson is who he is for a reason. He is a craftsman of
a fan, right? And that's a big deal. But anyway.
Totally. But I actually also feel like the CGI from The Lord of the Rings isn't necessarily improved upon all that often these days.
No, when it's good, it's good. It just stays.
Yeah, and there certainly have been some films where there's some incredible use of CGI. This is a couple of years later. CGI is not very good in this movie, I didn't find.
That's fair. There are parts where I think it's better than others.
Yes.
There are some parts where I'm like, oh, sweet Jesus, I forgot what CGI in 05 was like.
Yeah, and again, I think that would be super notable if it had to have come just before Lord of the Rings, just before maybe the first Men in Black. I'm trying to think of other movies that had some CGI that was kind of groundbreaking. It's maybe something like Independence Day, having some images where it was kind of like, oh, this is quite a feat of computer generated imagery.
The good news is it's before Avatar.
It is before Avatar, and even though you and I are not big Avatar fans,
God, I hate Avatar.
Visually, it's stunning.
Yes, it's a visually stunning movie, and it's the same story that's been told 14 different times.
It's Fern Gully.
It's Dances with Wolves with Blue People. It's Pocahontas with Blue People. We can come back to this another day. We'll have a special segment called Jess Rants About Shit, and it'll be delightful. Anyway.
Yeah, but I did really feel like for a film that does need CGI to exist, with talking animals all over the place, with fawns and centaurs.
Absolutely.
And polar bears pulling a chariot, and gargoyles, and this movie doesn't exist without CGI, or if it were animated, it could work. But
I don't think it would be as good animated.
I don't think it would be as good either, honestly, because you do need human characters, and it does make the 4 kids and Tilda Swinton really stand out.
Yeah, their acting is so very good because of the background of the other actors and characters they're acting upon. Anyway, sorry.
And there were so many points in it where I did feel like it felt the way that you and I feel like when we see the live action Disney movie remakes happening these days.
The hideous.
The just uncanny valley of the Lion King trailer, of watching a real lion have a talking voice, like their mouth being CGI'd to fit whoever's voice is there.
Yeah, it's hideous.
It doesn't
truly
work
upsetting
at all. And even in this one where, they're Aslan as a lion, to use one character as a comparison, is a very realistic looking lion. They have the proportions of a lion, they have the movements of a lion, but they also have the fake fur moving in the wind of cats, which is not a kind comparison.
Oh, cats.
But kind of true. And
yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, it did have a lot of moments where it took me out of it in some of those ways.
I was going to say the same thing. I think Aslan is the one, and it's disappointing because, again, you have a memory of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember having a very visceral reaction to Aslan, etc. I don't know how much you want to go into that, so I'll leave it for you. But yeah, there were points last night where I was like, on my rewatch again, where I was like, oh yeah, no, it's the fake. I think the fake fur, like wind in his fur, is the one that got me. And there's a reason it's so important, right? But like the fur is important. There's a reason they make it look that way, because it becomes a point later.
Yeah.
But also,
yeah, and a lot of the talking animals, I don't think I noticed as much with the beavers, because they don't have very large faces.
Yeah, they were pretty good.
So they lumber around, and they're beavers. Okay, that's great.
And they were cute.
The fox, Rupert Everett, God, that was distracting.
That's why you didn't recognize it was Rupert Everett, I think.
Maybe because I kept looking and just thinking, like, who is animating this fox's face?
My issue wasn't the fox so much. The one that took me out was the Gestapo wolves.
Yeah, that same
Gestapo wolves. I was like, I can't take you seriously because you feel like Timon and Pumbaa.
Mm-hmm. Where I think it worked better, the CGI at least, than anything else, was where you had it rooted to a real character. James McAvoy as Mr. Tumnus you watch that and it's pretty believable.
Well, and I think, too, for me, where it really worked was when she turns everybody to stone.
Yep.
When the White Witch turns them to stone, especially characters like James McAvoy, like Mr. Tumnus, because he is half human.
Yep.
And when he gets frozen, there's this, like, very real expression.
Mm-hmm.
But the act of turning him to stone didn't feel just like, boom, magic wand. Like, it actually felt like it was there for a reason.
Yeah.
And the griffins dropping the rocks actually didn't take me out of it. Like, there are parts of the war scene where that CGI is bang on.
Yeah.
Should be there.
And I think it's maybe because, spoiler alert, griffins aren't real.
Whoa.
Yeah. Flying bobcats are not actually a thing.
I don't understand.
I know. We live in Canada. If we were going to have flying bobcats anywhere, it would be here.
Oh my god, it's a bobcat.
Oh, memes are great. Anyways, yeah, I did actually find more often than not that there was the CGI ended up being distracting. And it also ended up being distracting, unfortunately, in a few landscape shots where you had the children involved with them, where it really just looked like not a very good green screen job.
Yeah, that's fair. I didn't notice those as much, but that is kind of how we watch movies, so tracks.
Yeah, so it's too bad because I think there's, clearly this is a pretty timeless story that's lasted for decades and decades and decades, is part of curriculums, which is why you read it as a child. And
I'm convinced, yes.
Yeah, and it just, that may be a me thing with being more sensitive to CGI not being super believable, but...
That doesn't sound like you at all.
Yeah, and
weird.
There's some great use of CGI out there.
And there are, again, at points in this movie, great use of CGI.
Mm-hmm.
There are also just points where it's clear. Now, I wonder, too, if some of that, if we go back and watch this in 2005... Mm-hmm. And you're right, it is on the heels of something like Lord of the Rings, what have you.
Yeah.
Would we have felt the same way? Maybe, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I don't remember feeling that way, but also I watch movies very differently now than I did at that point. So
yes,
there is some of that too.
I do actually. One movie that I did rewatch after watching it for the first time, not even recently. This would have been maybe 10 years after it came out. I really noticed it in the original Gladiator.
Oh, I did not. Listen. I watched the original Gladiator once. Mm-hmm. You cannot get me to watch it again.
Yeah, when I watched it the first time, I think it was in the theater because I would have been in university, and it was okay. Like it was a movie that came out in the summertime that was just more
summer blockbuster,
a summer popcorn movie, and for that it was pretty good. Then it won every award, and it was like, oh, okay, well, that's a choice. And I watched it probably almost 10 years later. In the wake of, now all the Lord of the Rings and all of these other movies have come out, we get more used to it. There's some really distracting CGI stuff in that movie.
Interesting.
Especially in the crowds, in the scenes in the gladiatorial arena.
I could see that. I could absolutely see that.
Yeah. So that may be a me thing, but it did unfortunately take me in parts of the movie and kind of go, oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. I did have I have a couple of fun points, but also a couple of larger ones, and one kind of revolves around the children characters and the archetypes around them.
Yep.
The actors playing the children, I think across the board were okay. Child acting is tough.
Oh God, I can't imagine.
It's really tough. When you watch a movie that has a really good performance from a child actor, it really stands out because it's not the norm. I think you kind of get used to it being, okay, well, it's a child and they're going to do this, and it's tough to emote when you're 9 years old on command. That's not an easy thing. And I think in this film it's okay. They do fine. I think it maybe is telling that they haven't had super fruitful careers past this, as opposed to other child actors may have had. Maybe someone like Jodie Foster or Jennifer Connelly.
Jodie Foster comes up once again.
Yeah.
Love her.
There's some excellent actors that started out as child actors and got really good roles. Maybe the best child acting performance of all time, and you may not have seen this movie, is Tatum O'Neal in Paper Moon for me.
I've not, but I know them. Like, I know it. I just haven't watched it.
And she had quite an interesting career. Also, quite an interesting family life. Her dad, Ryan O'Neal, also quite a well-known actor. Notable, gigantic piece of shit.
Yes. See, weirdly,
especially as a father.
I know this because of my pop culture obsession, and less than I've watched the movie.
Yeah. So something like that. I mean, that's an 11-year-old being nominated for an Oscar level of role, and those do happen, and they're kind of wonderful. And the kids in this one, I think, were pretty good.
Yeah, they were
About
fine.
What you would expect. I take a little bit of umbrage with Peter's ability to wield a sword.
Oh, it's funny you say that. I literally have Peter great with a sword. Peter's real great with a sword is my actual note.
Yeah, I like what he has several moments. Once he is given the sword from
Father Christmas.
From Santa Claus. Yeah. We haven't even talked about that. There's a random I'm not the Coca-Cola Santa Claus in it.
It's Father Christmas, because that's where you are.
And he gives them all weapons, because that's what you do, I guess, in Narnia. And Peter gets this longsword, which is your kind of prototypical Arthurian longsword in a sheath. That
sword situation.
He, takes out for the first time when the Gestapo wolves are chasing him by the waterfall, and he is trying to hold one back. And in order to do that, he is pointing it with not only the point straight at the wolf, but his entire arm extended straight at the wolf with both arms. Really, he's not selling the confidence in his ability to use this sword.
But I mean, he's not confident, and perhaps because I feel this, I was like, oh, Peter, my man. But isn't he every young man who's been forced into war, who doesn't know what they're doing to start with?
So, yes.
In that moment.
But he also is from an entire generation raised on King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table.
That doesn't mean he knows how to wield a sword.
But he's from an entire culture that sword fighting and usage of sword in war is centuries old by that time.
Sure.
And I'm sure in his lifespan he has seen someone wielding a sword. And I think of like the kid from The Sword and the Stone, when he first gets the sword that's too heavy. Like, he holds it like he's supposed to hold a sword, not like he is, ready to spear a fish.
I don't think you're wrong about how he does it, but also they're going through it, right?
Yeah.
There's no TV for them to see this.
Mm-hmm.
Why would he lives in London.
Yeah.
Why would he have seen anybody wield a sword? Like, his dad is in war, not with a sword.
Yeah.
With a sword. That was a tough sentence. And, his mom's not going to be chasing them with a sword around the house. I get what you're saying, and I
Yeah.
think there are later parts where he's practiced and it still looks weird, and
Yes.
I'm like, okay, bro, get it together. For me, that's where I was like, Peter. He does eventually figure it out, so good for him.
Yeah.
But that first one, I take less of an issue with, because where does he have... No one's taught him how to use it. Father Christmas gave him, like, potentially the worst collection of Christmas presents anybody's ever been given, these 3 children. Merry Christmas, here's some weapons and some bullshit.
Yeah. Here's a bow, go learn archery.
Here's some weapons and some bullshit. I swear. You get this. Also, since we're talking about that, Edmund's busy trying to track down his Turkish Delight at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is no gift for Edmund.
Yeah.
Where the hell does his sword come from? Because when there's a fight, Edmund's got swords and bullshit as well.
I'm gonna go ahead and say he stole one from one of the centaurs that got left behind.
Sure.
This is the untold story that C.S. Lewis never got to write.
The untold story of Edmund's sword, which actually sounds like it'd be a different genre of movie. One that you don't pay for. Moving on. The point of this story is, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think give the child some grace in the first one, but in other iterations where I'm like, all right, bro, you should have got this by now. You've practiced.
Probably should have figured it out.
So get her together. Yeah.
You're about to go fight Tilda Swinton, who is wielding her 2 swords like a fucking samurai warrior.
Like a badass that she is. Anyway.
Yeah. So there is a bit of that. And obviously because of the type of story it is, there's a certain amount of suspension of disbelief that goes into a lot of these things. I
sure as hell hope so.
However, this is, and I think this is kind of the biggest point to bring up that we've alluded to a little bit.
Matt's biggest sticking point. I love this part of this podcast.
It's going to be for both of us. The fantasy genre. And how you... And, I think you and I have probably both seen enough fantasy films, fantasy stories, read enough in that certain area that we kind of know what to expect. We know that there is a certain amount of world building, a certain amount of suspension of disbelief, reality doesn't apply sort of thing in the fantasy genre. And that's completely fine. I think that can work really, really well. It can work really well even when it's rooted in reality for something that's just like completely absurd or in small bits.
Right.
But as a genre itself, watching this again did remind me why it doesn't click with me at all.
Okay.
And I think the moment that it crystallized for me, which I actually mentioned last night and I wrote down here again, is when they're about to go to battle and Aslan has given himself up to be slayed on the stone table so that Edmund has his freedom and the White Witch will not go after Edmund.
Right.
And so Aslan lays on this stone table and the 2 girls, Lucy and I'm forgetting Susan. Lucy and Susan go to find Aslan and he is dead, bound on this broken stone table. And they stay there long enough, having the feelings as you would, because they're women, don't you know, and the emotions are to be repressed in all of the men. It's another British thing we won't really talk about, but it's certainly there. And they are openly weeping that Aslan is not there anymore, and suddenly he disappears and emerges back alive, full mane, intact after being shaved. It's grown back. Liam Neeson has been saved. Liam Neeson is the voice of Aslan. Maybe the most perfect piece of voice casting in the entire movie, by the way.
Which is funny, actually. I have thoughts, but continue.
Yeah. And he's alive, and they don't know why, and he says if the White Witch had to have known all about the deep magic, she would know that the slaying under false pretense or something along these lines. Basically, it amounts to Aslan is saved by double super secret magic. That's never explained.
Super secret loophole. I mean, it kind of is explained, but I know what you're saying. Yes.
I'm willing to actually give, without going back to read the book, that it's probably much better explained in the book.
Yes, I suspect it is. And it's part of if somebody gives themselves up for an actual traitor, but they have not committed they're not committed any acts of treason or are not traitors themselves.
Yeah.
Essentially, the deep magic will not allow them to be dead.
Yeah.
That's what this amounts to.
So,
also,
she lied, na.
Yeah. Too bad for her. I know that you don't understand why I lost my mind over it last night, but there is a line. Do not cite the deep magic to me, which I was there when it was written.
Yeah.
That's become like a millennial meme.
Yeah.
Especially when people are like, oh, did you see these? Like, my personal favorite is the young woman, and like, not to shit on Gen Z in any way, because God bless them. Or Alpha at this point, who are also using the internet. But the one who's got any millennial woman who lived through this will remember it. But it's a headband that's made of what essentially is like spikes.
Yeah.
And it pulls your hair back into tiny little, and if you're not careful, it'll stab your eyeballs out. And she's going, I don't know, you should use this. This is so great. And someone has said, don't cite the deep magic to me, which I was there when it was written.
Yeah.
And I forgot how much I loved where that was from. So, yeah, I had a small freak out about that. But you're right. It does often feel to me like it's a convenient loophole that we just kind of forgot to tell you about. Lol, JK, sorry about that.
Yeah.
It takes away from Aslan's death for me.
Oh, yeah.
Which,
completely.
of course it does. As it's an act of, like, self-sacrifice that is not actually one, because he knows. He's like, oh, I'm going to go be dead. But really, he's not. And he knows all along he won't be, because he's Aslan, and that's fine. Yeah, he's going to go be dead. I don't know. And I think, too... This is where I was talking about having a visceral reaction. I remember reading the book, and I remember seeing this movie for the first time.
Yeah.
And just emotionally losing my mind. Similar to Susan and Lucy, because as women, that's what we're allowed to do. And reading the book as part of a curriculum, you kind of have to stop at this certain chapter. So I remember being devastated and talking to the same girls that I've mentioned earlier about how devastated we were that Aslan died.
Yeah.
And this, for me, is where the CGI really took me out of it, too.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I'm not as sad about this, and I want to be. And the same, like, in the, when we talked about it in the Inside Out, where you were like, bing bong, got me again, you elephant, cotton candy donkey creation thing that cries candy tears. That will always get you, right?
Yeah.
Or often will. And I expected to have the same reaction.
Yeah.
And I think I did to an extent with the girl's reaction to his death, but his death did not hit me the way I thought it would.
Yeah.
Which is annoying.
It is. And it like you said, it does take away from that sort of thing when it's supposed to have a really big impact. And even if you do have the resurrection as part of that story.
Don't love that as a sentence.
Well,
there it is.
We're not going to talk about religious parallels, but boy, howdy, is that in here as well.
Aslan is also Jesus,
Yeah.
yes. Did he bring eggs? Sorry, he is risen. He brought eggs.
Callback. Well done.
I can't believe I didn't get there earlier. Anyway.
Yeah, but it does dull in a lot of that. Even the parts where the White Witch comes into the Aslan's camp to have a discussion about letting Edmund go free. It amounts to her hench animals, hench creatures, walking her in, putting her down, her having some stern words for Aslan, them walking into a tent. She walks out and everybody rejoices, and she kind of just barely says, how will I know you've kept your end of the bargain? He gets upset at her and she goes away. That's it. It's like, oh no, I saved Edmund with diplomacy.
And magic loopholes.
Yeah, like it just takes something that very clearly is a very big point, big emotional crux of that story, and just makes it be like, oh, here's the thing I did. And in that way, it actually felt to me like the Hunger Games movie, the first one. It's the only one I've seen.
Oh, I've watched all of them.
Yeah. Where after I watched it, I actually texted my brother because he's read all the books, he's seen all the movies, he's a fan.
That tracks.
And I asked him, I said, hey, do the books go more into the relationship between Katniss and the young girl that whistles and I'm not remembering her name.
I'm not either.
The one that like is in the trees.
Oh, I know. Yes. And emotional devastation. I can't think of her name, but yes.
And it feels like in the movie they spent all of this other time building up all the other parts of the story and all of this dystopian thing, and they get in the Hunger Games, and Katniss, is trying to survive and meets this young girl, and they become friends for 4.5 minutes. And then the young girl dies, and then she dedicates winning the Hunger Games to her death. And that's a huge deal. And I'm like, that didn't even last as long as some songs that I like.
Well, to be fair, you do like some weirdly long songs.
Yeah, but
Anyway.
I just was like, wow. And he said, oh yeah, it's like many, many chapters that for a movie you just can't, you can't fully put everything into a movie from a book because books are infinitely more detailed. And that, I don't think this movie falls into the trap as badly, but it does feel like that's a little bit glossed over.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember her name now. I think it's Rue, but nobody get that tattooed anywhere.
That rings a bell somewhere, yeah.
Again, not something I'm particularly attached to. I did watch it with K&K during the pandemic, all of those movies, and it was fun to watch with them, but to suggest that it's my favorite movie franchise or what have you would be a lie.
Yeah.
To go back pedaling a little bit though to what you said as far as books and movies, as I'm surprised this hasn't come up yet for either one of us.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, I'm not a fan of movies that are made after I've read the book.
Yep.
I'd prefer to, if I know there's going to be a movie, I'll watch the movie and then read the book. Or I'll read the book and not bother with the movie because most of the time I'm sorely disappointed. Yeah. I think it has come up in this podcast before.
I think so.
And it will happen again. But My Sister's Keeper, the end. But why? Anyway, it's not my normal practice to watch a movie after having read the book. Now, I think in this case, the movie and the book were so far apart for me that it made sense. There's a few others that are on our potential list that similarly I read as a child and then watched as either a teen or as an adult. Yep. And it was far enough apart that it was like, okay, yes, I know what's going to happen, but this is okay. This still felt faithful to the story without, you're right, I think it suffers from some glossed over because if you did everything that's in the book, the movie would be 10 hours long. Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason I tend to gravitate towards books as a poet, as a writer, as an English major, and a gender studies major, because why not? All of those sorts of things are true. I think that's why I tend to prefer books. But this one, I think, doesn't suffer from, it's horribly different, but it does suffer from the same sort of, it's difficult to do all the world building and all of the lore and all of the super secret loophole explanations because it can't. Right?
Yes. Absolutely. And I actually most of the time prefer movies if they're based on a book to not necessarily be super faithful to the book. And I think the most famous example of that's probably The Shining, where if The Shining as a book is terrifying, but the Kubrick film is not the book at all. In fact, famously Stephen King hated, and I think maybe still doesn't like the movie at all because he changed too much and he changed meanings of certain things, which honestly I'm more prone to enjoying because a movie shouldn't be beholden to its source material. It should work on its own.
I think that's fair, and you see that in other, even other movies we've talked about in terms of source material, right? Steel Magnolias being very much the play. Now, that said, we don't know the play, so there's that.
But there are some stories that can work really well when you just tell them, and they're few and far between. The one that I think is the gold standard is probably To Kill a Mockingbird, because that book and that film are not really very different from each other, and both are, extraordinary.
Well, thanks, Gregory Peck. I don't know what to tell you. I unabashedly love.
Yes.
To Kill a Mockingbird.
I know it's one of your favorites.
And then Go Set a Watchman. I know a lot of people had a problem with Go Set a Watchman. Sorry, this is a complete rant about books now. Hi, welcome to Jess's Book Hour.
I can't believe you haven't read.
I can't believe you haven't read as part of today's podcast. Go Set a Watchman, a lot of people had issues with. If you haven't read it and you are a lover of To Kill a Mockingbird, I do recommend it. It has been a while since I read it. people were mad about what it did to characters that they love, but I think it makes them more realistic.
Yeah.
And that's all I'll say about it. Just go read it.
Mm-hmm. But it also is, you know, and you and I both love that story, but as an example of something that is a success in a completely different format is the stage show that we went to see when we were in London of To Kill a Mockingbird, which is the same story told very, very differently. It's some areas being more successful than others, but is still entirely effective, entirely entertaining, and is its own thing.
Yes. Interesting that we've talked so much about our good friend J.R.R. Tolkien. You want to talk about somebody who's made a movie out of a known book entity that has followed it so faithfully.
Yeah.
It's Lord of the Rings movies. Right?
Yeah. And there's
Peter,
a lot...
our bestie, like...
tried his best.
He did... And he did a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
He really, really did. There's so many things that are so faithful to that book.
Yeah.
And needed to be, because as fans, it would have been a problem if they weren't.
And it still is to some fans, but as far as adaptations go, I don't think you could do a lot better.
No, it's phenomenal, as far as I can recall off the top of my head and remember feeling that way. So, interesting that comes up. But yes, that's fair. Fantasy, not usually our jam.
Not our thing.
I think the reason that I couldn't believe you hadn't seen this is because it was such a notable property for us, especially at our time. Like that you had read it, but you hadn't seen it, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of takes me as far as where I wanted to talk about.
Excellent.
I'm sure you had a couple of things.
I always do, but to be fair, most of them are... Okay, so prepare yourself for Jess's rapid fire thoughts about this movie now that she's watched it again.
Anecdotes.
Here we go. 1, Fonz also need therapy. 2, Mr. Tumnus is really like a creepy old dude in the beginning, which you kind of forget about. Because you're just like, oh, Mr. Tumnus is so good and he wants the good things. No, he's effing weird. He's like, come with me, little girl. You're a daughter of Eve. I'll give you some tea. And you're like, oh, no, I'm deeply unsettled, and I should be.
Guy with weird legs and a rat tail.
Yeah, and that's why when you were talking about he didn't have a van, and I was like, I kind of did. So that's, there again, a lot of these are not things we need to discuss further. I just need to get them out.
Yeah.
Edmund is such a shit.
Yeah, he is quite the kid. He is, he's not even really a rebel, and he definitely doesn't have a cause.
You know what I've written, actually, though, and here, middle child syndrome, ? He's not exactly the middle, but he isn't far off, and I get the feeling, I mean, also, to be fair to Edmund, he's dealing with a lot of shit. Like, your dad's in war, and he wanted to go back and save the picture, and they almost don't live through the Blitz because he wanted to save his dad's picture.
Yeah.
And to him, that's so important. And I get the feeling that he's probably got a closer relationship with his dad than he does with his mom, and that may not be true of his brother or the other sisters. And so that's probably part of it, but yeah, my only note here, Edmund, you think you would fucking learn. Like... kind
of a shithead.
Well, you think you'd learn, Edmund. The first 3 times you blurted out where everybody was. Anyway, this is the worst collection of Christmas presents you'd ever given me, is a line that I've used in a poem, and it's the only thing I could put through my head when Father Christmas is like, Merry Christmas, here's some bullshit and some daggers.
That's a busted-ass Father Christmas, too. Like,
well, I mean, Narnia hasn't had Christmas for 100 years.
That's fair. I think he might have had a shower.
If all of the children can fit on that ice floe, when the river is melting and they've got the sword and this, finally when Peter figures out how to wield the sword, and great, cool.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Why can't Jack and Rose both fit on the door?
Jack and Rose could both fit on the door.
Now, I know people have said, like, oh, it's a weight and blah, blah, blah. Like, literally, I've written, why couldn't they both fit on the door? And that's, it's just a fun debate I like to bring up. I don't actually give 2 flying rats behinds about Titanic in general, so the fact that I brought it up makes me giggle.
You know what would have been actually better for them? If Jack and Rose had 2 talking beavers helping them out.
Oh, shit.
They'd have lived.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 2 talking beavers, they'll solve all the problems.
Hey-oh.
That's, again, sounds like a different kind of movie. The horse whose name is Philip, I died. I forgot about the horse being Philip completely. And it's just like, come on, boy. And he's like, my name is Philip. Yeah. I think I snorted. Do not cite the deep magic to me. Where the hell does Edmund get his sword? when the witch shows up to war, is she wearing the fur they shaved off of Aslan?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
And I was like, gross.
Yeah.
You've taken your hair out of your locks, you white witch.
That's I think maybe a Viking tradition of some kind.
Perhaps. I kind of forgot that was a thing. So there's that. And then 2 actual points that I want to dive into slightly. One, casting.
Yep.
So one of the things you said, the voice of Aslan was perhaps the best casted.
Yeah.
He was not the first.
No, you mentioned that and left it dangling for us to talk about.
Liam Neeson was not the first voice actor, and whoever they had first, it didn't work out. He actually lobbied to be the voice of Aslan.
Right.
So, interesting.
He has a very special set of skills.
The man was meant for this. I truly think voice acting nailed it there.
Yeah.
It took an exceedingly long time to cast the children. They spent a lot of hours looking at tape and trying to find things. And I think I mentioned this last night too. Trying to get the right chemistry between 4 child actors who are meant to play siblings and also emote and be able to act, and for a noted piece that people knew, I think would have been really a challenge. But it was apparently a very difficult, arduous process to do that. Not only that, but the kid who played Edmund, I'm not picking on you, buddy, I promise. His voice started cracking during filming.
Oh, that's funny.
So they had to go back and redub some of his lines because his voice changed.
Oh, buddy.
So it's just one of those where I'm like, interesting that we talked about the casting. Because there's some, like, really famous folks. There's some not famous folks, at least at this point.
Yeah.
And, yeah, just apparently it was a very difficult process. It makes sense, but Aslan, Liam Neeson was famously not the first choice.
Interesting.
Which is funny because I don't think I can imagine anybody else doing it.
Yeah, it's a bit like trying to suggest somebody other than James Earl Jones should have been Darth Vader's voice.
Ew, imagine? No.
Yeah.
And then the last but not least, and this should come as a surprise to literally nobody who's ever listened to this podcast or knows me in person, gender politics, just real quick. Edmund with the coat, but this is a girl's coat.
Yeah.
And his brother says, I know. Ew. Gross. No, he looked like Pesto the multi-penguin, which I loved a little bit. I famously love penguins, but that, I know you look like a girl, haha. No, get bent. No. Yeah. Gross, but again, English and the time it's written, etc. However, I find it fascinating. The titles they get when they are given their crowns.
Yes, and I'm trying to recall. There is.
I have them written down. Don't worry. I got you. Edmund the Just.
Cool. That's maybe didn't pay attention to the rest of the movie.
Well, I think he figured out how to be just, and that's why he gets that title.
Yeah.
Peter the Magnificent.
Yeah.
Lucy the Valiant, i.e. Lucy the sure.
Yeah.
Susan the Gentle.
Yeah.
Interesting. I think Lucy the Valiant throws some of my point off because that is actually a solid title.
Yeah.
But I like the Magnificent versus the Gentle. Oh, right, because girls are only allowed to have emotions and stuff. Cool. And that I think you see a lot of, the fact that they're wearing dresses, and again, I get it, but also, if I'm fighting, give me some pants. Why am I? Give me trousers, damn it.
Yeah.
And they get their hair braided, and they have flowers put in their hair, and it's the two of them who have to deal with the emotional fallout of Aslan's death, quote unquote. And it's not something that I want to dive into super deeply or anything, but it's interesting to see a book and thus a movie that was written.
Yeah.
At the time it was, when gender roles were not so much stronger, because they're certainly still around, but much more part of the fabric of society and much more of a norm in 1950.
Yeah, and it actually, looking at it now, you have the 3 youngest of the children all getting titles that have an actual description to them, and the oldest one is just, I don't know, we don't fucking know, just give him the biggest sword and call him magnificent. He doesn't actually have, he's not the strong, he's not the brave, he is the magnificent.
Peter the Majestic. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a bit, I have thoughts about people named Peter anyway, but yeah. So I just thought it was funny to me. It's not a terrible, like, obvious difference. I think you're right. Magnificent isn't a particularly great adjective. Mm-hmm. And Lucy being valiant is, about being brave. So great.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was funny how it's Edmund the Just. Okay. Because he can dole out justice, I guess.
Yeah.
But Susan's the Gentle.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I mean,
okay.
I guess she could gently shoot this arrow into your eye.
And that's the thing, right? Like, she is one of the more violent of them. Lucy, you don't see stabbing people. She does use her, she does use her magic potion to bring people back. Yeah. And this is my last and final parting thought. Edmund lives. It's a Christmas miracle. Because it's Lucy's Christmas present from Father Christmas that brings him back. And so that's it. That's my thought.
Lucy didn't think to save anybody else, though, did she?
She did end up going around and doing that. That's kind of, I think, what's implied by that shot out. Yeah.
Brother first, and then, I guess I can save the animals. Wonder if she picked them by the animals she liked the best.
We may never know. Or we could go back and read the book and determine if that's ever laid out for us. In any event, this has been quite the discussion about a movie I didn't think we would talk much about.
Yeah. I think we brought up some interesting things. Overall, as a movie...
Yeah, what was like final thoughts?
Yeah,
that's fair.
It is, and I don't say that in a negative way, because I think as a kid's movie, I think it's pretty well done. And that's all it really needs to be.
For what it is, it's strong for who it is and what it is.
And the problem with saying, it should have been more adult and should have been more this. The problem is there was already 3 movies of this, and I don't need a trilogy. I don't need part 1 to be the lion, part 1 to 2 to be the witch, and part 3 to be the wardrobe.
The lion, the witch, and the audacity of that.
Yeah. I am okay with the movie as it is.
Yeah.
Even if it's kind of like, okay, I saw that. Cool.
Yeah, that's fair. It's not something I think you have to go back and rewatch at any point. And it's not one of those movies that we have this discussion and realize that one of us has missed a bunch because the other one's watched a bunch. Mm-hmm. Again, I think the reason that it ended up on this podcast was me going, I can't believe you haven't seen it because of what it is.
Yes. And it doesn't, like there are some movies that are made about very well-known intellectual properties, other novel, whatever, that kind of shouldn't really exist or don't do anywhere near as good of a job and kind of degrade the good name of it. I don't think this movie does that. I think it's pretty okay.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I like it. I feel like that was a good segue, speaking of intellectual properties and movies that were made.
Oh, we got a big one next. So I don't know if anybody has paid any attention to the numbering of our episodes.
I can't imagine anybody has.
Yeah, even though this is episode 6. Technically speaking, on our listing, it is listed as episode 006, and we couldn't go by episode 007 and do anything but a James Bond movie. And it just so happens you have seen...
Very few.
Mm-hmm. None of the original Sean Connery Bond movies.
Correct.
So, I'm going to keep it a bit of a mystery as to what
James
episode
Bond
7
does.
will be. But episode 7 is going to be a Sean Connery James Bond film.
Yes.
To be determined.
Excellent. Join us next time for Jess Has Lots of Thoughts.
Ba-da-ba-da.
Oh, wow. Well done. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We will catch you next time.
Thanks, everyone.